Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our second Hungry for History event. Um, Next week, it will be on the B&O Railroad, and our speaker will be Stanley Stewart. Today is on World War II fashion, and our speaker is Kara Gordon. Kara is our AmeriCorps service member here at Cockaigne, serving through August 26th, I believe, and then she will become Cockaigne site manager, and we're so glad to have her taking on that role. Kara Gordon.
So this year with a lot of our events, the goal was to focus on the Second World War. This year happens to be the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, and two of the Cockaigne brothers fought in the war, so we really wanted to make a big deal out of that this year. Um, that didn't quite happen, of course. A lot of programs are just not happening now. But this one is going to focus on World War II. And when we were planning these events, we really wanted to show the whole range of experiences that were a part of living through the Second World War. So today I'm going to talk about one side of life during the war that we don't always think about first, and that is women's fashion and the ways that women are keeping themselves and their families clothed during this unprecedented time. Now, if that phrase sounds familiar in this particular unprecedented time, I think you'll find that is going to happen a lot throughout this talk. So we may realize we have some things in common with the people who lived through World War II. So the United States enters the Second World War after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So over the next 4 years, that decision to enter the war would influence every single American in a lot of different ways. So World War II is called by historians a total war. And what that means is that it's not just soldiers who are fighting a war somewhere else. It's actually whole nations going to war with each other. So everyone is involved. Old men, housewives, young women, children, everyone is called on to work towards victory. So women especially are called on to lead the home front war effort in a lot of different ways. So they're asked to grow some of their family's food so that more supplies can be diverted to the troops. They're asked to take jobs in factories so that the production of important war materials can be maintained. They're also asked to volunteer for military auxiliary units, home front committees, the Red Cross, a lot of other different things. They're also asked to conserve all household goods. So after 1942, many different kinds of food were rationed, along with a lot of other different materials like rubber, nylon, and gasoline. Sometimes, though, even goods that aren't rationed are almost impossible to find. And we saw this once again, something that's a little bit familiar toilet paper, for instance. So women are also told to make their own and their families' clothing last longer so that fabric and production time can be devoted to making uniforms or other important war materials. So unlike in Great Britain or Germany, in the United States, clothing is never actually rationed. Um, but the government is still very strongly encouraging everyone to change their buying habits and make what they have last longer. So because of all these things, the war actually changed women's fashion in the early 1940s, and it changed women's attitudes towards fashion in some ways that we might expect, and in some ways that we might not expect. I'll try and take this. So one of those ways that we might expect is that during the war, most women owned fewer pieces of clothing. And because people are not constantly buying new clothing, styles really don't change that much from the start of the war to the end of it. We don't see that much of a difference between 1941 and 1945 as far as what's in style. Another expected outcome is that a lot more women gave sewing or mending their own clothing a try, even if they'd never done so before. Clothing could no longer be worn for just one season and then thrown away. You had to make it last, and you really didn't know how long it had to last. But one outcome that we might not have expected, but is very much true, is that during the war, many women actually became more and not less concerned about keeping themselves and their wardrobes looking good. In addition, the quality of the clothing that people own actually went up for the most part, because when people did need to buy clothing, they knew it's not just going to be worn for a season and thrown away. So they're willing to make a little bit more of an investment in that clothing. What's perhaps most unexpected, though, is that during the war, staying fashionable becomes one of the many ways that women are actually fighting the war and contributing to the country's morale. So far from being seen as frivolous, even with all the other tragedies and concerns that are going on, war clothing is actually seen as an important component of the home front effort. So what does 40s fashion look like? So I'll take you through a few of the basics here before we start. So for starters, I'm going to compare it a little bit to what comes before. So clothing in the 20s is vastly different from anything that had come before. After World War I, everything changes as far as women's clothing goes. Before that, it had been petticoats, it had been corsets, it had been skirts always to the floor, and that's gone, and it doesn't come back. So in the 20s, skirts are shorter, usually mid-calf. The silhouette is no longer curvy in any way. It is completely straight. Short hair becomes fashionable. Waistlines are really low down at your hip. A lot of what we think of as the flapper style, that's the 20s. Then we move into the 30s, and we start to get a little bit more of some curves back, but not too much. Instead of being very low, waistlines jump up, and they become very, very high. Skirts are still that middle length. They're mid-calf, you might say, or a little bit longer. But skirts are still very straight, just like in the 20s. The 30s, though, are all about interesting and intricate details. So blouses will have asymmetrical buttons, unusually scalloped collars. Skirts have really interesting shaped panels. This emphasis on detail and creating interest through shapes actually continues into the 40s. But the main ways that 40s fashion differs from 30s fashion, most of those differences can be traced actually to the war. So one of the biggest ways that the 40s silhouette differs is that skirts get even shorter. So instead of now being a couple inches above the ankle, they're now just a few inches below the knee. In some countries, this is actually mandated. So in England, where they are rationing clothing and they are rationing fabric, there are rules about how long a skirt can be or how much fabric can be turned up in the hem. Women deal with this, men also deal with this. And I might add that men are a little bit bigger babies about this sort of thing. So there's a huge uproar in England when they outlaw turn-ups or cuffs at the bottom of men's trousers. Because they find out that couple inches on every single pair of pants saves thousands of yards of fabric every year. But men are not happy about that, and that's one of the first things to be allowed back after the war is over. So as a result of some of these rules in these countries where it is rationed, fashion just sort of follows suit and adopts that. And so even in countries like the United States, where it's not a rule, it just becomes the style. Skirts are usually also narrow, taking their shape more from triangular panels or gourd panels, which are slightly smaller at the top, wider at the bottom, instead of having a bunch of pleats or gathers, because that uses up a lot more fabric. This is the main difference actually between the war years and what we think of as the late 40s and the 50s, when circle skirts become fashionable and they're incredibly full. In fact, it's almost a reaction to the war years because circle skirts out of anything are just an insane waste of fabric. You can get 3 different skirts, straight skirts, out of the fabric for one circle skirt. And so it's almost, it's on purpose. Like now we can use all this fabric for no reason. Let's just have fun with it. So skirts in the early 40s are very narrow. Another difference is the 40s is the much more masculine, almost military, kind of boxy silhouette. So just like in the 80s, just about every garment for women has shoulder pads. So everything has that square sort of emphasis in the shoulders, especially coats and outerwear. So I have some pictures on here of coats, and you can see how boxy they are. It's a fact throughout history that anytime there's a big war, some military style enters into civilian clothing. So that definitely happens during World War II, especially since a large percentage of the population, both male and female, would have been in uniform of some sort at that time. So it's just sort of natural that it becomes a part of civilian clothing as well. This is a war that everyone is fighting, remember, and so that mentality sort of shows up in the fashion world as well. Makeup and lipstick are a big deal in the 40s. So makeup comes into fashion in the 20s. Before that, it's only immoral women who wear makeup. But by the 20s, it becomes more fashionable for everybody. And in the 40s especially, lipstick is huge. So even if you're not wearing any other makeup, even if you're working in a factory, you'll see women wearing especially bright red lipstick. So that's kind of a signature of the 40s. But for women, there's still a big difference between what's worn at home and what's worn out in public. And then also what's worn at the new, sometimes manly jobs that women are taking on to help the war effort. So at home, women would be wearing very simple cotton house dresses, things that they can do their work in. In an effort to conserve fabric, these are often made from the material of feed sacks, just like we associate with the Great Depression. That sort of continues into the 40s in some places because of this desire to conserve fabric and use everything that you have. When out of the house, you'd wear nicer dresses, often made from rayon. Rayon is a new thing in the 40s. Rayon is a semi-synthetic, so it's not like polyester where it's completely synthetic, but it's not like cotton, which is a natural fiber. It's sort of a half. It's made from tree fibers, but with a synthetic process. Bare legs are still not respectable, so silk stockings are the norm. The wartime shortages make that a little bit difficult. There are stories, again, especially in England, of women actually painting their legs brown, drawing the seam, which is up the back of the stockings because of how they're made, drawing that with an eyeliner pencil so that it looks like they're wearing stockings when they can't find them. They're usually still silk at this time because nylon stockings don't really become a thing until after the war because nylon is an important and rationed war material. So with that, you need to be wearing all the appropriate accessories. So hats, gloves, bags, these are all things that are very important to complete your look, much more so than they are today. So overall, the era is just a lot more formal than we are accustomed to. But there are beginning to be some exceptions to that formality. So for this, I'm going to ask my models if they'd come up here for me. So the 40s saw the rise of a unique style, especially for teenagers and college students. So more and more young women are going to college at this point in time, or some other form of further education. And these girls are looking for simpler styles. So they're often seen in photographs, just like Jeriel here, wearing collared blouses that almost look very much like man's shirts, and very simple skirts instead of full dresses. They'll also often be sporting either saddle shoes or sandals, sometimes with cuffed socks, sometimes with cardigan sweaters in cooler weather. So this is what your average college student is wearing in the 1940s. There's also a strong influence in the 40s from what we would call folk dress, especially for younger girls. So this shows up in dirndl style skirts, which is like what Josie has on here. She made that skirt herself, by the way. It goes with a nice white peasant blouse, which is also a very folk style, and then goes with a braided hairstyle. What's kind of funny about this is that is very German. It definitely has influences from German folk dress, which you think is weird. Aren't we fighting the Germans? Yes, we are. But I think it comes from the 30s. So during the 30s, Germany is promoting its folk culture, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for not very good reasons. But because of that, it sort of spills into the mainstream fashion and it carries on even into the 40s. So thank you, girls. You're lovely. The war also required women to do some jobs that had been primarily done by men before. So some of these are strenuous, dirty, or dangerous, and could not really be easily done in typical female clothing. So because of this, we see in the 40s more and more women wearing trousers for the first time. And a lot of women talk about this, about how it's crazy to be wearing pants. They think it's so odd. Some women love it, some women hate it, but there's definitely this, it's very new. Garments like overalls, smocks, or coveralls also became important occupational clothing. And I do have some overalls. So these are definitely not the most flattering garment in the whole world. The pants are probably about twice as wide as today's pants for women, but they are surprisingly comfortable. I wore them to plant a victory garden, so they are very, very practical as well. So some different hairstyles go along with this as well. Women become, more and more women have short haircuts at this point in time because it takes time to maintain long hair, and it also has the potential to get caught in machinery. There are actually whole government campaigns where they have Hollywood actresses who are famous for having long hair. They show them in posters with their hair up or with new short hair, encouraging women to be safe and cut their hair short so that they don't get involved in accidents in a factory. Other things like headscarves or turbans also become popular for the same reason, keep your hair out of the way. So I have a mannequin over here with a headscarf that you can see tied. These practical styles, because they're worn to do important war work of all kinds, they sort of become symbolic of the era. So whether you're planting a victory garden, whether you're working in a factory, whether you're out helping on a farm, these are all things that are very much associated with important efforts for victory. So we still associate that, like Roseby the Riveter, we still associate that style with the 40s and with the war effort. Just like everything else, in all of these ways, clothing and fashion become linked to the war and the many different ways that people are fighting it. So fashion becomes connected with winning the war, actually, and being clothed well was thought to be an important part of maintaining the country's morale and keeping up the good fight. So because of this, many companies, encouraged by the government actually, published how-to books on a variety of clothing-related subjects. So there are sewing guides and sewing patterns that are now achieving a tremendous new level of popularity. More people are buying sewing patterns than they ever had. There are also booklets on different things related to clothing, like best laundry practices, household budgeting, different other handcrafts like knitting or crocheting are also very popular. But some of my favorites are the booklets that are devoted to helping women maintain and diversify their wardrobes at home, using just their own skill and a whole lot of creativity. So I'm going to focus on two booklets today. They are this one called Make and Mend for Victory. It's published by the Spool Cotton Company in 1942. And the other one is called Build Your Own Wardrobe, published by the American Thread Company in 1943. So both of these booklets contain chapters on mending and darning, alterations, easy accessories, and beginner sewing tips. So they're both incredibly creative, and they're just packed to the brim. There's no wasted space in any of these books. So I found these on eBay. So these are original to the 40s, which I think is awesome. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I've made using their suggestions and their instructions. I always find that there's so much you don't learn about history until you do it. And so I'll share with you some of the things, again, expected and unexpected, that I found while trying to follow some of these suggestions. But first, I want to read you the introduction here that's on the first page of Make and Mend for Victory, because I just think it really captures the role of the home front and the role of fashion and clothing during the war, which is not always what we might expect it would be. So it starts off with the Consumer's Victory Pledge. So as a consumer in the total defense of democracy, I will do my part to make my home, my community, my country ready, efficient, strong. I will buy carefully, and I will not buy anything above the ceiling price, no matter how much I may want it. I will take good care of the things I have, And I will not buy anything made from vital war materials which I can get along without. I will waste nothing, and I will take care to salvage everything needed to win the war. And this is signed by the Consumer Division of the Office of Price Administration. Then the introduction on the table of contents continues. I love the way it's written. This whole book is just written so cleverly. I love the wording. It's up to you to keep the home fires burning, to see that you and your family stay easy on the eyes. Fortunately, you can be patriotic and pretty both. It's easy to teach an old wardrobe new tricks, to resurrect the skeletons in your closet and bring them up to date. Come on, take those old knockabouts and turn them into knockouts. Keep that glint in Uncle Sam's eye and still do your stint towards victory. I love that they're talking about that staying fashionable is a patriotic effort, but you also don't want it to take away from your other patriotic efforts. So you want to be very careful about where you're and how you're spending your time and use it wisely. So then these tips then show you how to do that. So the first chapter of Make and Mend deals with mostly mending and patching. So it covers everything from patching actual tears, almost invisibly, to tips on how to get the most wear from each type of garment. And a lot of these are actually ideas for preventative maintenance. So the idea isn't that you wear your socks until they get a hole in them and then you think about fixing them. They actually tell you to reinforce the toes and heels of your stockings before you even wear them for the first time, or to add underarm shields to your dresses so that they never get worn out in the first place. So these are a lot of things that we may not even think about doing, that they're actually told to do first and not wait for the clothes to fall apart. There's also instructions for sewing split seams on gloves, and turning inside out worn collars and cuffs on a man's shirt so that the worn outside becomes the new inside and you can wear the shirt twice as long. And just to show you how serious everyone was about conserving every little bit of material, the section on sewing supplies gives a whole paragraph on conserving thread. So we're not wasting anything here. The next chapter is on alterations. So most of these are simple fixes, things like raising the waist of a dress, shortening a hem. Most seamstresses will know how to do these things. And as a seamstress myself, I can tell you, it does make a huge difference in how your clothes look. Just those little things that make it fit better. But unlike patching holes, those things aren't absolutely necessary. Can you wear a dress if the waistline is too low? Yes. Can you wear a dress if the hem is a little bit too long? Absolutely. So these are things that show that they're focusing not just on staying clothed, but on staying clothed well. So if you imagine yourself living through a crisis like a worldwide total war, I think most of us would be happy just to be dressed, and maybe not be worried so much about how well our clothes fit or if they look a little shabby. But what's so interesting about the war era is that that's not what they're thinking at all. And it's a little bit of genius, I think, in a way. I mean, we're still and did go through a worldwide pandemic. And what were some of the things that we were being told early on? Make sure you get up in the morning, get dressed, fix your hair. These things are important to maintaining your morale and not getting depressed. So the 40s kind of understand this as well. Next comes the chapter on accessories. So the realm of accessories is another little bit of genius from the 40s. With clothing being precious and scarce, women were encouraged to use a wide range of accessories to rescue their wardrobes from boredom. You're not going to have as many clothes, as many dresses, but people do get bored. So again, it maintains your morale to have something different to wear occasionally. So one other sewing book that I have of the time writes, "It's wise when making a dress to choose a neutral shade for the frock itself and introduce the color notes with accessories. There are many ways in which changes can be made with little touches of color and new interest. A contrasting collar with matching cuffs, for instance, or a gaily colored leather belt with buttons to match, or just big chunky buttons will lend a personal touch and give additional charm for many occasions." So Build Your Own Wardrobe also has a similar section on accessories, using one dress to create 5 different outfits. So I have here a simple dress in a neutral shade to show you what some different accessories can do. So one of the easiest additions would be a different collar. So Build Your Own Wardrobe has a whole section on patterns for different collars that you can add to dresses. So this is one of them. It's blue and white striped. And you can see it makes the dress look very different. And it's worn underneath, so it's not actually attached. It's a separate piece. If you take that off, and I hope I can, there we go. Then, of course, you can wear the dress plain, and it's a different look. Then I have another collar here. It doesn't quite perfectly fit this dress. Okay. But you can see, looks very different. You can wear it that way as well. And then I have one more option. So you add these little black velvet epaulets here. And a belt. And these could be basted on with loose stitches or sewn on with through the buttons. And then there you have yet another way to wear exactly the same dress. So that's 4 different ways. Looks different, a little bit different every time, but it's the same dress. Handmade jewelry is also another important accessory. So metal, of course, is one of the most important war materials. You need metal for everything. So metal is not going into frivolous things like jewelry. Of course, people still have whatever jewelry they had before the war, but sometimes that gets old. So there are also instructions for how to crochet jewelry, like this very patriotic necklace of stars here. And with that, you have, once again, another way to wear the navy dress. And a very patriotic choice as well. So both booklets also have instructions for making several different kinds of hats, which are one of the most important wartime accessories. So in the 40s, hats are still worn nearly all the time. And they're an easy way to change an outfit, even if you can't buy a whole new dress. So hats become very popular. I mean, they always were very popular, but they become much more purchased because it's easy to get that retail therapy sort of feel of having a new thing to wear with a hat. Hats are actually the one thing that are not rationed in England. So a lot of people are buying hats there. Although, like I said earlier, even though it's not rationed, sometimes they're hard to find. But when they can find them, they are very highly sought after. So with all of these things, with hats, with different collars, with different bags, you can wear the same dress almost every day for all different types of occasions and still have it look a little bit different every time. So the last chapter of Make and Mend is called You Have the Goods on Him. It's the one I find the most interesting. It's all about making new garments by cutting up old garments, especially men's civilian clothing. So the introduction reads, chances are your closets have their quota of old coats and suits, too good to give away, but too antiquated and cut to come out in the open. Every home has its collection of tired dresses, shirts weak in the collar, and nowadays many have a number of suits made of precious priority wools, drooping forlorn and unworn on their hangers while their owners are away wearing Uncle Sam's latest models. So in the pages that follow, there are cutting layouts and specific pattern number suggestions for women's suits to be made from men's suits. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I had never thought of doing that at all, so I thought I'd give it a try. So I bought a suit on eBay. It was not a 40s suit. Don't anybody panic. It's not a war era suit. It was actually from the 80s, I think. The only other time in history when men's pants have been baggy enough to cut a skirt from them. I tried it with a modern suit first. It doesn't work. Slim fit pants don't make a good skirt. So the original one was also very worn, so I also didn't feel bad about cutting it up. But it looked very much something like that one there. Typical men's suit, a nice gray wool. So here I will reveal, I've made it dramatic by putting a tablecloth over it. I'll reveal the new suit. So here we have the woman's suit made from a man's suit. I will have to tell you, I hand sew whole 18th century wardrobes, all the layers, everything by hand from beginning to end for fun in my spare time. Okay? This was the hardest and most miserable thing I have ever made in my life. I will not do it again. Um, I would not do this unless you were absolutely desperate and had nothing else to wear. So that's another thing that I learned is that these are not fun little life hacks, easy ways to get new clothes. These are hard. It's actually much harder to cut a woman's suit from a man's suit or to cut a child's dress from a man's shirt rather than just starting with the fabric and doing it from that. But that shows you that at this time, it's very different from now in that materials are harder to come by than time. Even though time is valuable too because they're doing a lot of different things. Everybody's got multiple jobs. Um, but time is still more abundant than materials. So it makes more sense for them to make a suit from an old suit and spend the time puzzling out all the pieces than to buy the new fabric, which they may not be able to buy. Um, that's very foreign to us because how many people here, if they get a hole in their socks, will darn it? You will? Okay. Okay, a couple people. Well, this is a you're here because you're interested in fashion, so this may be an unusual audience, but I think most people today would throw them away because we would rather go buy a new pair of socks and spend the money than spend the time. And usually we are lucky enough to be able to do so. That is not the case during the war era. There's also instructions for a number of children's garments that you could make from men's shirts, from vests, pants, or from old women's dresses. There are instructions for turning a man's suit or a man's shirt, sorry, into a child's dress, a man's coat into a child's coat, or men's trousers into boys' overalls. So these are all different things that you can use what's already in your closet to make new items. The idea being that hopefully by the time the men come back from the war, there will be new clothes to buy so that they don't need to wear the old ones anymore. But especially as the war goes on, it takes more and more time, more and more investments of time and creativity for a woman to keep herself and her children looking respectable. Keep in mind that while she is turning a man's suit into a new suit for her, she probably now also has a job outside the home, is the only one taking care of the house, and is usually doing volunteer work like knitting for soldiers, organizing scrap drives, organizing blood drives for the Red Cross, or any number of other efforts like that. So with all of these methods that I've showed you, women are trying to make the best of a truly difficult time. By sewing and mending, in a way, they're refusing to let the war get them down. And for us looking back, maybe that's a little bit shallow. Maybe expecting women to put valuable time into their clothing and their fashion during wartime, it does seem a little bit shallow. Women are asked to potentially sacrifice their sons, their brothers, their husbands, their fathers, and yet they're still supposed to care about what they're wearing. But one of the things I found that's so different about the war era is this commonly held understanding that those ordinary things like clothing are actually important. They're essential for getting you through an extraordinary circumstance and staying sane. Um, there's also this idea that creativity and individual effort are actually the foundation of any national effort. So it depends on all the little things that everyone is doing. There's also this understanding that there's a lot of different things that men and women contribute to society, and there's this a different sort of value placed on the things that women can contribute. That feminine beauty is just as much and just as important of a contribution as masculine strength is, and so that they need that as well to maintain this total war effort. So now, when we think about all of the people who fought and sacrificed to win the Second World War, I hope you also remember the women, the ones who didn't spend the war fighting, but did spend it knitting, darning, mending, gardening, praying, sewing, to preserve that little bit of normalcy and give the whole country something to look forward to. So I have a lot of things up here, a lot of things on the board. There's some of the suit layouts if you'd like to see those. You're welcome to get a closer look at anything that's up here. Most of them are reproductions. They're not original. I've made most of them, so it won't hurt them to be looked at or touched. And also, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching.